Let's get started. So in our last video lesson, we had just finished talking a little bit about motif and the importance of music in the story. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in just a second. And before that, we talked about the characterization of our antagonist, Arnold Friend, and of our sort of minor character, Ellie, and how those help us understand the story. So you've just read this article on Charles Schmid. This gives you a little bit of insight into one of the author's call to write. And let's talk a little bit about that now. So as we already know, a call to write can be historical, as it was in the lottery with the end of World War II and the push towards traditionalism in American society. It can be social and cultural, as it was in the yellow wallpaper with this cult of domesticity, forcing women to stay home and isolate themselves from all things intellectual. It can be personal, as it was in Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado, where he's engaged in these feuds with Thomas Dunn English and Rufus Griswold. For this story, we have a couple of different calls to write, some of them cultural, some of them kind of social, cultural, historical, slash. So let's take a look at all of the ways in which the author might have been influenced to create this text. The first call to write is the one on Charles Schmid. So if you read the article on Charles Schmid, you know that he was a serial killer in sort of operating in the 1950s and 1960s. Charles Schmid was arrested in 1966, and as you already know, the story was written in 1966. So it's fair to assume that the author was influenced by the news media of the time. So this is a time period before social media. She would have been getting all of her news at, with the 6 o'clock news or in print on newspapers, and this would have been all over the front page. So where do we see that particular call to write reflected in the text? We can see this call to write reflected in the characterization of Arnold Friend. We know that Arnold Friend appears to wear a wig. He appears to stuff his boots. He appears to be wearing makeup. And he also seems to have this sort of hypnotic quality. As Connie listens to him, he becomes, or she becomes rather, dizzy. And a lot of people are sort of confused by the ending. Why would she get up and follow him out? And I think it's important to sort of take a second and look back at that article and see how Arnold Friend compares to the real life serial killer Charles Schmid. So in the article here, it says that he added to his 5'3" height by stuffing rags and things into his boots. So like Arnold Friend, Charles Schmid stuffed his boots, or rather like Charles Schmid, Arnold Friend stuffs his boots. He dyed his hair raven black. Arnold Friend is described as having a black wig and wore pancake makeup, pale lipstick, and mascara. If you remember at one point, she notices how long and dark Arnold Friend's eyelashes are. And this implies that he as well might have been wearing mascara. So it says the lashes were thick and black as if painted on with a black tar-like material. So simply in terms of physical description, Charles Schmid and Arnold Friend seem to be one and the same. On top of that there's this hypnotic quality that Charles Schmid seems to have. Charles Schmid dated a lot of young teenage girls and seemed to sort of I don't know, he got a lot of attention from them. The girls were always fighting over him, and he encouraged them to engage with him in some of his crimes. So if you look at the lower half of this article, it talks about how he was sort of just joking with some of his friends. Hey, maybe is it possible for us to get away with killing somebody? And so he persuades them to go for a drive with them and go off into the desert. And it says here at the bottom of the article, something like 30 teenagers, all friends of Charles Schmid, heard him brag about the crimes and said nothing. So this here again is similar to Arnold Friend. Both of these characters seem to garner attention from young girls, attention that apparently is undeserved, and also seem to have this hypnotic type of ability to encourage these young girls to do things that go against their nature. The other call to write, or the second call to write in this story, could be biblical. So the fourth commandment, honor thy mother and thy father. This is a commandment that Connie seems to be struggling with, especially in regards to her mother. She seems to be breaking rules, stretching the boundaries. At one point, she wished she and her mother were dead. So when Arnold Friend comes into the picture, he sort of represents the dangers of ignoring your parents' advice or going against your parents' advice. And we can see this in the characterization of Arnold Friend and the symbol of his car. So in the characterization of Arnold Friend, a couple of things. One, if you take his name and you remove the R's from his name, so if you remove the R in Arnold and the R in Friend, you get an old fiend. And fiend is another word for a demon or a devil. And in some ways, Arnold Friend seems to be a bit of a demon or a devil. It's interesting that he seems to know things without being told. He knows Connie's name, for instance. He knows that her father is at a barbecue. He knows what people have gone to the barbecue. At one point, he's telling her about all the people who are there, and she's like, "How do you know that?" And as the reader, you're like, "Yeah, how does he know that? That's crazy. Is he stalking her? What?" So this fact that he knows things he should know, the fact that he has this hypnotic quality, all of these things give him this demon-like kind of character. The other thing that's kind of interesting is his car. So I mentioned at one point that there's this code on his car, right? So I'm going to flip back here. The 33, 19, 17. And we talked about how those numbers add up to 69. And that is both a sexual reference, but it can also be a biblical reference. So 33 can reference the 33rd book of the Bible, Judges, the 19th chapter, and the 17th verse, which reads, "When he looked and saw the traveler in the city square, the old man asked, 'Where are you going? Where did you come from?'" So that's kind of an obvious reference there. So it's very possible that she's responding to this sort of cultural, biblical kind of call to write. The final call to write appears to be the music of the 1960s, and we can see this reflected all throughout the text. The first way that we see it reflected in the text is in the dedication. So if you read the dedication, it reads, "For Bob Dylan." And then later on, at one point at the end of the story, Arnold Friend um, will refer to Connie's blue eyes, even though she has brown eyes. And that may be an allusion to a Bob Dylan song called "My Blue-Eyed Jane." So in a couple of places, she seems to be referencing Bob Dylan. We also see this musical call to write in the characterization of Ellie. So as I mentioned before, Ellie equals Elvis in the story. He wears the V-neck collar with the sort of wings out by the side of his head. He's got the black sideburns. He's got the music box always on his head. So he's always associated with music. Ellie, Elvis, right? In that way, we see this sort of musical call to write. And then in the last is in the actual music itself. I'm not sure if you noticed this, but music is literally always in the background. So I'm going to read some of these passages. So this one is in paragraph 6, at the bottom of paragraph 6. It reads, "The music was always in the background. Like music at a church service, it was something to depend on." And again, this is the music of the 1960s. So this is Elvis music. This is the kind of music that is making the sort of baby boomer parents nervous. There's a lot of references to sex. There's a lot of sort of sexualized dancing and things like that. Later on, Connie goes to the car with Eddie. This is on that first night when she's at the burger joint with her friend. Connie couldn't help but let her eyes wander over the windshields and faces of all those around her, her face gleaming with a joy that had nothing to do with Eddie or even this place. It might have been the music. So notice the music there and her being with Eddie, and think about what that might mean here. Then flip ahead to paragraph 10. So here she is thinking a little bit about Eddie, right? And all the boys that she's met. But all the boys fell back and dissolved into a single face that was not even a face, but an idea, a feeling, mixed up with the urgent, insistent pounding of the music and the humid night air of July. We mentioned once before, right? Moisture and heat, moisture and heat. What kind of imagery is that? That's some sexual imagery associated with this music here. And then one more for you. This is in paragraphs 12 through 14. Connie sat with her eyes closed in the sun, dreaming and dazed with the warmth about her, as if this were a kind of love. the caresses of love, and her mind slipped over into thoughts of the boy she had been with the night before, and how nice he had been, how sweet it always was. Not the way someone like June would suppose, but sweet, gentle, the way it was in movies and promised in songs. And when she opened her eyes, she hardly knew where she was. The backyard ran off into weeds, and a fence-like line of trees behind it, and the sky was perfectly blue and still. She shook her head as if to get awake. It was too hot. She went inside the house and turned on the radio to drown out the quiet. She sat on the edge of her bed, barefoot, and listened for an hour and a half to a program called XYZ Sunday Jamboree, record after record of hard, fast, shrieking songs she sang along with, interspersed by exclamations from Bobby King. And look here, you young girls at Napoleon's, Son and Charlie's want you to pay real close attention to this song coming up. And Connie paid close attention herself, bathed in the glow of a slow pulsed joy that seemed to rise mysteriously out of the music and lay languidly about the airless little room, breathed in and breathed out with a gentle rise and fall of her chest. So notice not only references to music, but the sexualized references to music. She's getting hot while she's listening to the music. The music is insistent and pounding, right? So there's some like sexual language here. And all of this seems to imply that that there is a lot of danger in listening to this kind of music, certainly for Connie, and how the story kind of ends for her. Which brings me to the ending itself. So Connie leaves with Arnold Friend, and a lot of students have a hard time with this. Why would she leave? Why not just like slam the door in his face? Why not call 911? What the hell? Why did she leave? A lot of people read this story as an allegory. Remember that an allegory, and so we've been talking about allegory since the very beginning of the semester, an allegory is a two-part story with a simple surface narrative and this sort of deeper hidden meaning. And so many people argue that this is really a story about a young girl's sexual awakening. And if that's true, then the house becomes really important. This house represents her childhood, in many ways the female body, protected by her father, by her parents. If Connie stays within her childhood, she will remain safe. But if she chooses to leave, and she does, she makes the conscious choice to leave her house. If she chooses to leave, she opens herself up to danger. So one of the arguments that the author seems to be making in the story is that sex for girls and women is dangerous, that growing up is dangerous. That seems to be the general argument. So altogether, all of these different calls to right come together to make this sort of the same argument that that sort of trying to grow up before your time, that refusing to listen to your parents, that engaging in the sort of loose morals of the 1960s, all of this opens you up to danger, the kind of danger that allows predators like Arnold Friend, aka Charles Schmid, to have access to you.